He thought humiliating her would make great television. He thought the audience would laugh along. But he didn't see it coming. Her response, her power, her truth. And when she finally spoke, the only sound left in the studio was the sound of his career crumbling. The stage lights bathed the talk show set in a warm, artificial glow. The audience buzzed with anticipation, waiting for another night of entertainment. At the center of it all, James O'Connell sat in his sleek leather chair, fingers tapping rhythmically against the armrest. He was the king of this domain, a seasoned talk show host with a reputation for sharp wit and brutal takedowns. He thrived on controversy, on putting his guests in uncomfortable positions, on making them squirm under the weight of his carefully crafted jabs. And tonight, his target was Maya Carter. Maya sat across from him, poised, elegant, and composed. A striking black woman in her early 40s, she exuded the quiet confidence of someone who had fought too many battles to be rattled by a smug television host. Her tailored navy suit, the understated gold jewelry, the way she held herself, all of it spoke of power, of control. Yet, to James, she was nothing more than an easy mark, another ambitious startup founder, trying to prove herself in a world that had little patience for underdogs. The audience barely knew her name, but they had seen the headlines. Tech genius or just another lucky break? From foster care to CEO, a Cinderella story or a PR stunt. The press had scrutinized her rise. How a woman with no Ivy League degree, no generational wealth, no powerful connections, had somehow built one of the fastest-growing AI companies in Silicon Valley. Some called her a visionary. Others dismissed her as a fluke, a token success story. And James? He had already decided which narrative he preferred. "Welcome to the show, Maya," he said smoothly, his signature smirk already in place. "It's not every day we have a CEO who, how should I put this, doesn't quite fit the mold." There it was, the first jab. Maya didn't flinch. She simply smiled, crossing her legs as she folded her hands in her lap. "And what mold is that exactly?" she asked, her tone light, almost playful. James chuckled, pretending to consider her question. "Oh, you know." He waved a hand vaguely. "Tech CEOs usually have certain credentials, certain backgrounds, certain advantages." He let the last word hang in the air, the implication clear. The audience chuckled, sensing where this was going. This was the James O'Connell they had come to see, the master of backhanded compliments, the man who could cut someone down with a single well-placed remark. But Maya remained unmoved. She had been here before. Maybe not on a talk show stage, but in boardrooms filled with skeptical investors, in meetings where men twice her age spoke over her, in conversations where people assumed she wasn't the decision-maker in her own company. She had spent years perfecting the art of patience, of playing the long game. James, however, had no idea who he was dealing with. "So, Maya," he continued, shifting in his seat, "let's be real. A lot of people are wondering, how much of your success is actually yours? I mean, with all the diversity initiatives these days, sometimes the right doors just open, don't they?" The room fell into an awkward silence. A few audience members exchanged glances. Others chuckled nervously, waiting for the exchange to escalate. This was James in his element, pushing the line just enough to get a reaction. Maya took a slow breath, her expression unreadable. She could feel the weight of the cameras on her, the quiet anticipation of millions watching from their screens. This was what he wanted, a flustered response, a defensive stance, a moment of weakness that he could seize upon. But Maya Carter didn't do weakness. She leaned back slightly, tilting her head as if studying him. And then, with the faintest smile, she said, Funny. I was about to ask you the same thing. The audience let out a collective, ooh. Even James faltered for a fraction of a second before regaining his composure. Maya could see it now. The flicker of irritation in his eyes, the barely perceptible tightening of his jaw. He wasn't used to guests pushing back. He wasn't used to losing control. And this was only the beginning. James O'Connell let out a short laugh. But there was something different this time. Forced. Almost brittle. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on the desk, tilting his head like a predator, assessing its prey. The audience was waiting, hanging on to the tension that now simmered between them. This wasn't just another interview anymore. This was a game, and James had no intention of losing. "You've got a sharp tongue, Maya," he mused, flashing that signature grin that had shredded countless guests before her. "But let's talk facts. Your company, Luminar AI, exploded in valuation last year. Impressive, sure. But I can't be the only one wondering how much of that success comes from actual innovation and how much comes from, let's say, being in the right place at the right time." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Some nodded along, entertained. Others shifted uncomfortably. The question was razor-sharp, laced with an insinuation too familiar to ignore. Maya didn't blink. "And what exactly do you mean by right place, right time?" James chuckled, feigning innocence. "Come on, you're a smart woman. The push for diversity in tech, the VC firms looking to back different kinds of founders. Surely it's fair to ask whether doors opened for you that might not have opened for others." There it was. The thinly veiled accusation. The audience reaction was mixed. Some gasped, others laughed, waiting for the inevitable takedown. This was James's arena. He had built his career on moments like this, dismantling guests piece by piece, reducing them to stuttering, defensive versions of themselves. But Maya wasn't playing defense. She leaned forward, mirroring his posture, her voice steady. "So what you're saying is, my success isn't real?" James shrugged. "I'm just asking the questions people are thinking." Maya smiled. "Interesting, because when I look at you, I wonder the same thing." The crowd erupted. Cheers, gasps, the unmistakable "oh" that signaled a verbal punch landing with precision. James's smile faltered. Just for a second. Maya didn't give him time to recover. "Let's break this down," she continued, her voice calm, deliberate. "You've hosted this show for what? 15 years? Built a career off controversy, off cornering guests, off making sure you always have the last word. But tell me, James, how much of your success is actually yours? And how much of it comes from being in the right place, right time?" Silence. "You think you're asking hard questions, but all I hear are excuses," she continued, her voice light but cutting. "I could play that game too. I could say maybe you got this job because of who you know. Maybe doors opened for you because you look like the guys who usually sit in this chair. Maybe it's easier to build an empire when the system was built for you in the first place." James cleared his throat, shifting slightly in his seat. His usual smugness was slipping, replaced by something tighter, more controlled. He opened his mouth, but Maya wasn't done. "The difference is," she added, leaning back effortlessly, "I don't waste time worrying about how other people got here. I focus on staying here." The audience exploded. Cheers, applause, a few standing up, clapping. The camera caught a woman in the front row mouthing, "Damn." James forced a laugh, but there was no humor in it. He drummed his fingers against the desk, glancing toward the producers, probably wondering how much time was left in this segment. He had planned to dismantle her, to turn her into just another headline. Instead, she had flipped the entire conversation back on him. But he wasn't done yet. "All right," he said, voice smooth, regaining some of his footing. "I see what you did there. Clever. But let's talk numbers, Maya. Your company's valuation skyrocketed, but with all these trendy investments in AI, how do we know you're actually building something sustainable?" Maya simply smiled, because now she knew exactly how to end this. Maya could see it now, the barely concealed frustration in James's posture, the way his fingers tapped against the desk a little too quickly. He was recalibrating, scrambling to take back control. This was his stage, his show, and yet, for the first time in a long time, he was losing his grip on the narrative. The audience had felt the shift too. What had started as just another interview had transformed into something else entirely. A battle of wits, a test of composure. And Maya wasn't just holding her ground, she was owning it. James exhaled sharply, flashing that performative smile he had perfected over the years. All right," he said, lifting his hands in mock surrender. "You're good, I'll give you that. But let's get real for a second, Maya." His voice lowered slightly, adopting the tone of someone about to drop a hard truth. "You built Luminar AI from the ground up. Impressive. But you've got competitors. Real competitors. Giants. OpenAI, Google DeepMind. Companies with resources that dwarf yours. So tell me, do you honestly believe you can keep up? Or are we just witnessing another bubble waiting to burst?" The audience went silent, sensing the underlying venom in his words. This was James's last strategy. Discredit her. Strip away the layers of confidence until doubt crept in. Maya took a slow breath, letting the tension settle. And then, she laughed. Not a nervous chuckle, not a forced, polite reaction. A real laugh. Warm, effortless, the kind that made it clear she wasn't the least bit rattled. James frowned, clearly not expecting that. Maya tilted her head slightly. "You know what I find interesting, James?" she mused, her voice like silk over steel. "Men like you never ask that question when the CEO looks like you." A murmur spread through the audience. James opened his mouth to respond, but she wasn't finished. When Mark Zuckerberg launched Facebook in his dorm room, no one asked him if he could compete with Microsoft. She held his gaze, unwavering. When Elon Musk started Tesla, people weren't lining up to tell him that Ford and GM would crush him. But a black woman builds a billion-dollar AI company, and suddenly, we're questioning if she belongs in the room. The murmur turned into a roar. Applause erupted, some audience members even whistling in approval. James shifted in his seat, but Maya wasn't giving him a moment to recover. "You see, James," she continued, crossing her legs, her tone smooth and unwavering. "People don't question my company because of its numbers. They question it because of me. And if that makes some folks uncomfortable, well," she shrugged, "that's their problem, not mine." James let out a forced laugh, shaking his head. "Oh, come on, Maya. Let's not turn this into something it's not." Maya raised an eyebrow. "Turn it into what, exactly?" James hesitated, just for a second. And that second was all she needed. She leaned in, voice softer but no less sharp. "You see, you came into this interview expecting to put me on the defensive. Maybe you thought I'd get flustered. Maybe you thought I'd stumble over my words. Maybe you thought I'd crack under pressure." She paused, letting her words sink in. "But the problem is, James, I don't break." The audience was eating it up. The cameras zoomed in on James, catching the flicker of irritation that crossed his face. This wasn't how the interview was supposed to go. He was losing. And then, just as the tension reached its peak, the producers' voices crackled into his earpiece. 5 minutes left. James heard it loud and clear, but Maya saw it. The way his shoulders tensed, The quick glance toward the control room. She knew. And just like that, she smiled. Time flies, doesn't it? She mused. James forced another chuckle, trying to regain his footing. All right. We've had our fun. He turned to the camera, as if trying to steer the show back into safe waters. But let's wrap this up on a positive note. Maya, tell me, what's next for Luminar AI? Maya didn't take her eyes off him. She could have answered the question like any other CEO would. Spoke about expansion plans, new projects, upcoming milestones. But she wasn't any other CEO. Instead, she reached for her phone. With one smooth motion, she unlocked it and turned the screen toward him. The studio cameras zoomed in, broadcasting the numbers in real time. The audience gasped. On the screen was a press release, a live announcement from Bloomberg. Luminar AI had just secured a $250 million investment from one of the biggest venture capital firms in the world. James froze. The audience erupted into pandemonium. Maya simply smiled. What's next? She repeated, locking eyes with him one last time. I think the numbers speak for themselves. And with that, she slid the phone back into her pocket, leaned back in her chair, and waited. Because now, James O'Connell wasn't the one running the show anymore. She was. Silence. For the first time in his career, James O'Connell had nothing to say. No quick-witted comeback, no dismissive joke to brush off the moment. Just a stunned expression as the reality of what had just happened sank in. Maya Carter had not only taken control of the conversation, she had turned the entire show into her stage. The studio was electric. The audience wasn't just watching anymore. They were witnessing something historic. Phones were already out, capturing this moment, knowing it would spread like wildfire across social media. James shifted in his seat, forcing out a laugh, but it was hollow now, desperate. Well, he started, but his voice lacked the usual confidence. He glanced toward the control booth, as if silently begging for a commercial break, an escape, anything. Maya didn't move. She simply watched him, an amused flicker in her eyes, as if daring him to find a way out of the mess he had created for himself. You look surprised, James, she finally said, tilting her head. Didn't see that coming? The audience exploded. James let out a sharp breath, adjusting his tie. All right, he said, trying to regain control. I'll admit, that's impressive. Very impressive. He forced a smile, trying to act like this was all part of the show. But hey, no hard feelings, right? Just a little friendly debate. Maya's smile never wavered. Oh, absolutely. Just a conversation, she said smoothly. Then, after a beat, she added, one I was more than ready for. The crowd roared again, and James's fingers curled subtly against the desk. He was losing them. He had built a career out of controlling narratives, of twisting stories to fit his own version of events. But today, there was no spinning this. No rebranding the humiliation unfolding in real time. Because everyone in that room, everyone watching at home, saw it. They saw how he had underestimated her. They saw how he had tried to discredit her. And now, they saw him struggling to salvage his own reputation. The producers' voices crackled into his earpiece again. 1 minute left. James cleared his throat, trying to wrap things up. Well, Maya, I think it's safe to say you've made your point, he said, pasting on a smile. And, I guess we'll all be keeping a close eye on Luminar AI's next moves. Maya just nodded, the picture of effortless grace. I'm sure you will. There was no need for more words. The damage was done. Not to her, to him. The cameras cut to commercial, but it was too late. The internet had already decided who won this exchange. Within minutes, Twitter was flooded with clips, hashtags trending worldwide. Maya owns the stage talk show, Take Down James Who. And just like that, the man who had built a career humiliating others had become the punchline of his own show. Meanwhile, Maya simply rose from her chair, adjusted her blazer, and walked off stage, with her dignity, her power, and her legacy intact. The second the cameras cut, the energy in the studio shifted. Crew members exchanged looks, unsure whether to pretend nothing had happened or acknowledge the massacre that had just unfolded. James O'Connell sat frozen for a beat too long, his trademark smirk now replaced with something else entirely: shock, humiliation, maybe even fear. Maya, on the other hand, moved with complete ease. She stood, smoothing out her blazer, offering James a polite but distant nod before turning to leave. She didn't gloat. She didn't linger. She didn't need to. Because outside this studio, the world was already watching. By the time she reached the lobby, her phone was vibrating endlessly, notifications lighting up her screen like a Christmas tree. Clips of the interview were everywhere, millions of views pouring in by the second. The headlines wrote themselves: James O'Connell finally meets his match, and it's brutal. CEO Maya Carter flips the script on talk show host, and the internet is loving it. When misogyny meets the wrong woman, watch Maya Carter shut down a host's arrogance in real time. And then, the real blow came. A breaking news alert flashed across her screen. James O'Connell's network had just released a statement. They were reviewing the incident. The kind of language that only ever meant one thing. James wasn't just losing control of this narrative. He was losing everything. Back in the studio, James finally pulled off his earpiece, exhaling sharply as he scanned the control room. The producers refused to meet his eye. His assistant, always quick with an encouraging word, suddenly looked like she wanted to be anywhere but here. For the first time in his career, James O'Connell realized he was the story. And Maya Carter? She had just walked out, head held high, leaving behind nothing but the ruins of his reputation. As Maya stepped out of the studio, the crisp evening air hit her skin, cool and refreshing, a stark contrast to the heat she had just left behind. She took a deep breath, letting the moment settle. Not just the victory, but the significance of it. She hadn't come here to win a debate. She hadn't come here to prove herself to a man like James O'Connell. She had come because she belonged in that seat, because her success wasn't up for discussion, because no amount of condescension, no smug host, no carefully crafted jabs could erase the empire she had built. And now, the world had seen it. Across the city, in homes, in coffee shops, in office break rooms, people were watching her words, her power, her truth. Some, like James, had underestimated her. Others had doubted her. But now, they knew. And James? He would be fine eventually. Maybe he'd lay low, rebrand himself, make a comeback. That wasn't her concern. His redemption arc was his problem. Her only job was to keep building, keep leading, keep proving that she never needed permission to be here in the first place. She checked her phone one last time. Number sign Maya owns. The stage was still trending. With a small smile, she slid it back into her pocket and walked away. Because the only validation she ever needed was her own. So, what do you think? Have you ever been underestimated like Maya? Have you ever had to prove your worth when no one believed in you? Drop your thoughts in the comments. And if you love stories like this, don't forget to hit like, share, and subscribe for more.